So by now you know that muscle is really important for metabolic health, for burning fat, for improving your resting energy expenditure, and helping with aging and longevity. So how much time do you need to dedicate weekly towards resistance training to optimize your strength and muscle gain? Well, I want to share with you a high-level overview paper titled No Time to Lift, Designing Time-Efficient Training Programs for Strength and Hypertrophy, a narrative review. This was a really good review highlighting the science, linking the minimum effective dose of exercise, specifically resistance training, to optimize strength and hypertrophy as you get older. The scientists say weekly training volume is more important than training frequency, and we recommend a training program with a minimum of 4 weekly sets per muscle group. Important to recognize that that's basically the bare minimum you need to prevent age-related muscle loss and support hypertrophy and strength as you get older. I think you can do that. You can do 4 sets per major muscle group per week and focus on compound movements like hip hinges, deadlifts, squats, bench presses, pull-ups, military presses, chest presses. You can do these things, dumbbell rows. And you want to focus on using a rep range. Again, 4 sets using rep ranges between 6 and 15 rep ranges. Later on in the session, we're going to talk about strength. We're going to talk about speed and drop sets and all that. But you should be targeting these lower rep ranges, not always going and doing 25 repetitions. I see people at the gym all the time. They're doing band exercises. They're doing hip adductions and abductions. And doing 40 reps and so forth. Those can be helpful if you go to failure, but it's important to recognize that sometimes training for speed can improve strength, which we're going to get into shortly. So the scientists say that advanced training techniques such as supersets, drop sets, and rest pause training, like doing squats or deadlifts and then doing, say, a pull-up and then pausing, so bouncing between lower body and upper body exercises and supersetting those, can cut the time down in half. And even training for speed, as opposed to just going to failure, can actually improve your strength and hypertrophy, which we're going to get into shortly. So the scientists say that drop sets and supersets are methods that are probably better at inducing hypertrophy than strength, and more research is needed for longitudinal training effects, but we advise restricting the warm-up to exercise-specific warm-ups. And that's important. I see people going to the gym, they're doing all these static stretches, and they're spending a lot of time warming up and so forth. But if they only have 40 minutes to exercise and spend 20 of that goofing around with warm-ups that don't really do much for their specific muscle groups, that's not really time efficient. So one thing that I think is helpful to recognize from this paper is focusing on minimizing the time that you spend warming up. I know people that can deadlift 500 plus pounds, squat 600 pounds. You know how they warm up? They warm up by squatting, by deadlifting with light weight. And so they might do 3 or 4 sets with just the bar and 1 plate, for example, to get the body warmed up and move through it. Then they start adding weight over time. So this is really important to recognize that you want to do exercise-specific warm-ups. And so if you're going to warm up to do a back exercise, for example, instead of just sitting there and do static stretches, you might get an exercise band, hang it from the pull-up bar, and do some assisted pull-ups to get your muscles primed and so on, and then start doing unassisted pull-ups, for example. If you're going to do bench press, maybe 3 to 4 sets at 80% of your 1 rep max, you might want to start just doing some push-ups and then warm up. That could be your warm up and then get into the bench press. So let's summarize what these scientists talk about. Then we'll talk about training speed and velocity as a modality to improve strength. The scientists say that we should perform 4 weekly sets per major muscle group. Okay, so if you want to build your quads, you can do 4 front squats, for example, 4 sissy squats. You want to build up your glutes and your posterior chain. Maybe you can do pause squats. You can do low bar squats. You can do belt squats. You can do hip thrusts. 4 sets. I mean, I think that's doable for a lot of people. And you can increase the volume up to 10 or more sets per major muscle group over time, depending upon your time constraints and how much you're adapted to training. I think that's really important. But for strength and hypertrophy, focusing on lower rep ranges between 6 and 15 repetitions. Again, this is important. I see people doing 25 repetitions of different exercises because they saw someone on Instagram that has the glute loop and the booty bands and recommend doing all these high repetition exercises. If you go to failure, those can be helpful, but generally speaking, those are accessory exercises like we talk about in the glute masterclass with Erica Grisanti and also Dan Stephenson and so forth. We want to focus on the compound movements first, hit those 4 to 10 sets per those muscle groups. And then if you have more time, then you can finish on the high repetition accessory exercises. So that's important. Specifically, the scientists say lighter loads in the 15 to 40 rep range can be used if training is performed close to failure. So that's really important for home-based training and using bands. Okay, so what should you train? Well, the scientists say perform at least one lower body exercise and one pulling and one pushing exercise for the upper body, preferably bilaterally or multi-joint exercises. So what would that look like? That would be like a squat or leg press followed by a seated row, then resting and repeating, and then finishing up with, say, bench press, right? That could be one day. And then maybe that could be on a Monday. A Wednesday, you could do something related, but if you did a seated row or you did pull-ups, maybe you do more chest or shoulder focus exercises as you superset between legs and back, for example. They say use machines and or free weights based upon training goals, availability, and personal preference. I want to underscore personal preference. It's really important. If you like a certain exercise, keep doing that, but maybe change the speed at which you do that exercise, change the rep range. You can use accommodating resistance with bands, with chains, with drop sets, and so forth. That's really important. They also say that using elastic bands and body weight can be helpful for home-based training, but you need to be progressive, following progressive overload principles, working with a coach or using a program so you get progressively stronger and not stagnant. But again, focusing on 4 sets per major muscle group, that's a great place to start. So I think most people have time to do that. Now, I want to get to this image and talk about why compound movements really help, and then finish off with speed training and how velocity and training for speed can actually improve the time efficiency. But first, just want to say thanks for being here. Appreciate you hitting the like button. Leave me a comment if you find this information helpful. Now, since we're talking about strength training, especially as you get older, you know that creatine is one of the most widely studied ergogenic aids. It's very safe. It's very effective. Using 2.5 to 5 grams on your exercise session days has been shown to improve muscular strength, muscular endurance. Now, studies show that when you pair electrolytes with creatine, you help enhance the absorption of creatine. We also know that exercise muscle absorbs creatine about 25% more than non-exercise muscle. So using creatine with electrolytes on your exercise training days can be helpful. That's why over at Myoscience, we formulated the really novel and unique electrolyte-containing creatine sticks. So we have a 30-serving travel-friendly stick pack as well as a 45-serving jar, different flavors. There's over 600 reviews over at our website, myoscience.com. A lot of customers have been leaving feedback like Nikki just said, the best electrolyte I've tried. It tastes great and it has reduced my cramping, and it also has creatine. Other folks have recently left great reviews. I have a longtime customer that has told me that it has improved his heart rate variability before he goes to bed. So he takes this after training in the evening before bedtime and notices a bump in his HRV during sleep. So you can save over at myoscience.com. Use the code podcast to save. I'll put links in the description below. But as you can see from this visual abstract of the paper that we're talking about, when figuring out what to train, focusing on compound movements. And we've talked about this before. This is common sense for a lot of you, but most people don't know what a compound movement is. When you're doing an exercise that incorporates 2 or more joints at the same time. So think about a pull-up. You're moving your elbow and your rotator cuff. Think about a squat. You're moving your knee and your hip at the same time. Deadlift. You're incorporating, your arms, your upper back, your lower back, your glutes, your hamstrings. So focusing on exercises that are more time efficient. These compound movements are not just for high school football players and college athletes. These are for people in their 60s and beyond because they're very time efficient. And the scientists literally say this right here. What should I train? Primarily multi-joint exercises, a minimum of 1 each. Leg presses, upper body pulling exercises, upper body pushing exercises. So bench presses, pulling would be anything that would involve the back, and leg exercises. So using a combination of both machines and free weights are helpful. The scientists say that weekly training volume is more important than training frequency. If you only have 2 days per week, it's fine. Hit between 4 and 10 sets per muscle group, depending upon how adapted you are to exercise. That's really important. And again, using loads that correspond between 6 and 15 repetitions. Lower rep ranges are generally better for strength. Slightly higher repetition ranges like 8 to 12 reps might be better for hypertrophy. Now, if you're going to do more than 15 repetitions per exercise, you should be going to failure on those exercises. You're feeling that burn, that muscular endurance, and so forth. But again, that's highlighted in this image in gray, not green, because it's not really the most time efficient, because most of those high repetition exercises are using low weights, using bands and the sort. And so you're not incorporating as much of the neuromuscular unit when you're actually doing those exercises and so on. So it's really important. Now, if you want to prime muscle growth, drop sets and supersets and rest pause training can be helpful. And this can cut time involved in training by half, they say. So really important. Again, if you're trying to maximize time efficiency, avoid static stretching, avoid extensive warm-ups. Start warming up with the exercises you're going to do. Just do lighter weights or use bands to offset some of the weight. So I think that's really helpful, especially if there's time constraints. Now, finishing up with strength specifically and training velocity. And I want to highlight this because when I go to the gym, I see people doing super slow sets because they've heard in some book that super slow training and time under tension is so good. But I see people do that and they never really get stronger. And so here's what's really important. So for strength gains, it appears that both fast and moderate slow velocities are effective across different load ranges, but fast velocities may be specifically helpful for improving strength. And so what might that look like? Instead of doing super slow 5 seconds down, 5 seconds up, it might be 1 second down and half a second up and really moving the weight. And so here's what's interesting. The scientists say after 6 weeks of training using loads corresponding to a 60 to 80% 1-rep max range, performing between 2 and 8 repetitions, maximal strength was achieved in the bench press. It had increased by 18% in individuals who did max velocity reps versus just 9.7% in people who did half max velocity. So training for speed increased strength over time. Now, I think this has to do with the fact that when you do high speed training and trying to max out and max effort type training, what you're doing is you're incorporating more of your nervous system and the nervous system connection with the muscular unit. And I think that can be effective for incorporating more muscle fibers. And I think that's effective as you get older. So trying to train for speed, I think, can be helpful, and throwing that in and just understanding you always shouldn't be doing the super slow training. I hear people, there's several books that have been promoting this, and I don't think it's a good idea for everyone. So in another study by Padula et al., this particular study randomized 20 resistance training subjects divided into performing bench presses with either a fixed pushed velocity or a self-selected velocity. And what they found is that when both groups trained twice per week for 3 weeks at 85% of their 1-rep max at different velocities, the group that had a faster velocity did 62% fewer repetitions, yet increased their strength on their 1-rep max by over 10% compared to the group who had a slower velocity. They only increased their strength by 1%. So again, if you're doing these super slow sets and slow eccentric contractions and all this, you may not be maximizing your strength. And we know that strength is really important. We've shared many videos over the years about the importance of grip strength and its association with a reduction in all-cause mortality and reductions in falls and hip fractures and the like. So training for speed may improve your strength, which over time has all these health benefits that can reduce the probability that you'll end up in an assisted living facility when you get older. So I know you've probably been doing super slow training, but you might want to try to train for that velocity, for that maxed effort. And what that is doing, velocity is linked with power. So the more power you're imparting during training, that can improve the recruitment of muscle fibers and the neurology of this, which has a brain-based benefit as well, because you're incorporating your central nervous system, causing it to cause more muscular contraction. And that's been linked with health benefits. And we know that people that do strength training, as they get older, they have a faster walk speed, faster gait speed, they're more stable, they have better balance and all that. So I want you to remember that. So I think it's really important to recognize that just 4 sets per muscle group per week. Overall volume is more important than frequency. So if you just have 2 days a week, that's fine. Just hit between 4 and 10 sets per major muscle group, compound movements, try some speed training. Don't always go slow. And if you're short on time, superset between legs and upper body, legs and upper body, legs and upper body. That's really important. And for more periodization and variety, you can do drop sets. You can do accommodating resistance training with bands, with chains. We talk a lot about that in the Glute Masterclass. Dan Stephenson is really knowledgeable in this area. He's someone I've worked with for over 10 years. So I encourage you to learn more about his information. Ideal Strength over on Instagram is Dan's account. So in summary, vary your speed and try to aim for between 4 and 10 sets per major muscle group. Focus on those compound movements where you're moving 2 or more joints per exercise. And I think you'll notice some significant improvements in your progress as you start to embark on a resistance training program. Hopefully you found this information helpful. Hit that like button. Let me know what you think in the comments, and we'll catch you on a future one down the road.